Okay, so you might have a podcast where it's you, a co-host, and maybe a couple of guests, all using 3 separate microphones, and you're getting a weird echo sound in your recording that's maybe the sound of your co-host voice or maybe your guest voice. It's bleeding into your main microphone. How do we fix that problem? That's coming up next. Hey there, podcaster. My name is the Shannon, radio broadcaster, podcaster, and podcast producer. And today's video is brought to you by my guide on monetization, monetizing your podcast. The 6 clever ways to monetize your podcast. As you can see, this is still in draft form. I've been working on it for quite some time, and I'm almost finished with it. And of course, once I am finished with it, those who get on my email list and download the condensed version, because I got a condensed version on my website right now where it's a lot shorter than this one. As you can see, this one's a little more expanded. You can get this one for free, because after I basically send this out to everyone else, I'm putting this book up for sale, and people will only be able to buy it at that point. So make sure you get on top of that as soon as possible and be a part of that list. And of course, if you're wondering where I've been and wondering what has happened, you can always check out what's going on and what I am doing, and maybe why I missed a video like I did last week. I completely acknowledge that. Go to my community section on YouTube right here, and you can see that I make posts right inside of there, and I'm asking you guys to engage with me. And you'll see that there was a little bit of tragedy that had gone on in my life with a certain friend of mine, and you'll see what happened there. So you can go over there and comment on those posts as well. But that's where you can find me there, or you can always reach out to me on social media or on my email. You can find that in my about section on YouTube. So today we're talking all about mic bleed, and when I'm talking about mic bleed, I'm talking about the microphone bleed that you're getting before you take anything into any digital audio workstation, any type of DAW like Audition or Pro Tools or Audacity. What we're trying to do is we're trying to fix that noise, all right? And I'm not talking about the noise floor, that hiss. I'm not talking about the hiss. What we're talking about is the carryover voices that are going from mic to mic. And I get this question asked quite a bit from people, and they say, how do we fix that? Because it seems to be an annoyance for them. Well, I'm going to tell you this. You can't make a complete fix on it, because microphones pick up sound. That's what they're meant to do. And depending on the type of microphone, whether it's a directional microphone, the dynamic, and all that stuff, it just all depends on the type of microphone that you're going to have. But just know that you're always going to get some type of pickup bleed over from some microphone, depending on how your levels are set on your mixing board. Okay, so if you're not using a mixing board, you're going to have troubles with this. But if you're using a mixing board, you can kind of temper this away and help your recording sound a little bit more rich and a little bit more sound for your listener. Okay, and just remember, your listener will notice it, but they're not really going to care a whole lot. Only you are going to care as much. So it's best that you try to have the best recording so that you're giving your listener the best possible listening experience. All right, so let's kind of give you an example of what's happening. All right, so we'll give you an example of this particular room right now. This room is sound treated. It's in the radio station, and this room has really expensive mics. Actually, these are RE20 microphones. Now, you might be using some other type of microphone, whether you're using a high LPR 40 microphone or whatever. And just know that those microphones are still going to pick up the sound, like I said. And when you go in and you start recording your podcast, you're going to have your levels turned up to a certain level on your board, all right? Just as we see here on this particular board, I could raise the levels on this, and that's going to determine how much output is going to be in the final recording of the podcast, right? The same thing could be used whenever you're using the Yamaha MG10XU. You're going to have to adjust the levels in the sound, all right? Now, what happens is that you're getting into this very lively discussion on your podcast, and you start to hear your co-host like maybe shout, and you're hearing a weird echo, and it sounds strange. Now, ways to fix this as a host, because I've been doing this for so long, I just figured out and realized that what is happening is that my levels on my board were not set correctly, but there's no way I can eliminate that sound or any type of exclamation that someone is projecting into the microphone or in the room, because it's going to bounce off the walls and eventually it's going to come right directly into the microphone, all right? So how do we kind of temper that away, all right? So what you're seeing on this particular board are levels, and this looks different from, say, the Yamaha board, but I might have certain levels turned up, and this number one level right here is going to be number one level is going to be turned up at a certain level right here. So I typically have it about 15 decibels. And all of these other levels right here are going to be your other guests, all right? So mic 2 is going to be mic 2, mic 3, mic 4, and it just goes on and on and on, all right? So it's going to go on and on and on right here. And you're going to want to monitor your levels. So you're going to want to make sure that your levels work, and you're just going to have to monitor it in your headphones as to how loud someone is speaking into the microphone. Now, I have a video on microphone technique where I talk about the distance between you and the microphone is going to determine how rich you're going to sound going into the recording. So it's important that you understand how close you are to the microphone when you're speaking. You can even tell whenever I pull away from this Blue Yeti that it doesn't sound as rich, but as I get closer, it gets a little more rich. So your distance between you and the microphone will determine how rich that sound is. When someone makes an exclamation and they step away from the microphone, their sound is going to come over and bleed into yours. So that's just going to be something that is natural. It sounds like radio, and that's what happens. I've heard this recording happen multiple times in my years of being on the radio. Now, as you can see, there are about 3 to 4 microphones. Actually, this particular studio has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 microphones. And sometimes all 6 microphones are all used at the same time, which makes for terrible bleed over, because what you're doing is you're turning up all the levels on the mixing board, and now you have all the sound that is coming into the microphone, every microphone, and it's just kind of making it sound a little more echoey. So what you have to remember is that the more microphones that you include in your recording, the more you're going to get that echo, because the more the microphones are going to be picking up on the sound. But if it's just between you and one other co-host, it's not going to be as pronounced of an echo that is bleeding from microphone to microphone. You will have to constantly be monitoring your levels on the mixing board as you continue to record your podcast. That's something that I think is very important, is that you're constantly having to monitor your levels. This is something that I have been doing for almost 20 years. I will turn my microphone up, my microphone levels up, and sometimes I will need to turn them down, just depending. It all depends. So playing with your levels on your board is not an uncommon thing. You can do that, and it will help you the sound of your podcast. Now, it's best that you have your microphones a decent distance away from each other so they're not bleeding into each other. So and they're directional, like you have them directional. These microphones are very directional, all right? And you can do this with a Blue Yeti, and I believe you can do this with some Shure out there, and they're very directional, and you're not going to have as much bleed over. But make sure that your distance between you and your guest or your co-host is at a quality distance so that there isn't too much bleed over. But you will get some of that bleed over, because if you're doing a podcast that's like radio, you're going to get that bleed over. If you're doing a podcast like a storytelling podcast, that's more like going into a sound booth and maybe recording in a quiet room, and you're not going to get as much bleed over, all right? So you have to understand the differences in the delivery of the type of podcast to figure out the elimination or to temper down the sound of the echo that is going into the microphone. So I hope this really helps you out and gives you a better understanding and an idea. Anytime you do this and you take these types of audio recordings into Audition, you're going to always have a hiss, and you're always going to have a noise floor in some instance or case. Now, there are plenty of videos that are on YouTube that'll help you fix that. I don't worry about them too much, because it just makes your audio recording sound like they are underwater. But what I do care about is the planning that you do before you go into the recording process to understand how hot your levels are for you and your guest and your co-host, so that you can not have to do as much work in the editing process in post-production. So I hope this makes sense. Now, do you have this type of problem with your podcast, and now does it make sense for you? I'd love to hear your comments down in the section below, and let me know what you're struggling with when it comes to creating a quality audio sound for your podcast. I'd be interested in seeing what you're doing, or what have you done to fix this problem, because people who come in and they read the comments in my YouTube channel, you also helped them as well. So this channel is just not my channel. It is your channel just as much. If you like this video, go ahead and leave it a thumbs up. And of course, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below and hit the little bell so you can get notified whenever I go ahead and drop a brand new video right here on this YouTube channel. And again, I'm sorry I wasn't here last week, but we're back on schedule, and I'm glad I could provide a brand new video just for you. And if you're jumping into the podcasting game for the very first time and you don't know where to start, and you want to figure out which equipment that you need to get, especially if you're creating a podcast that has to deal with maybe it's more like a radio broadcasting podcast, there's an essential equipment guide that you can check out that is right up here on the card, on the screen, or you can hit the button or hit the link down below in the description below. And don't forget to check the description of any important information that might help you in your podcasting journey. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for watching the video. There's going to be a video on the end screen right over here so that you can check out that might help you get started with your podcast, or maybe a playlist on how you can promote your podcast. I haven't decided what I want to put there yet, but it definitely will help you out. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for subscribing and watching. Share this out with your friends, and we'll be talking to you soon.